Добрый день.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the session of Silk Way. Enthusiasm around this topic in Russia was very noticeable within last years, but I personally don't feel it for the last several months. We'll try to figure out what happened to this enthusiasm. Maybe things are fine and maybe expert community is not delivering true information. So we hope that the connection of the European Economic Union. My name is Alexander Gabuev. I'm the head of the program of Russia in Asia Pacific of Carnegie Center, and I'll be moderator of this session. I suggest such a format. We will not make certain presentations. We'll have panel, and I'll ask one question to every panel members, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves, and they'll have half an hour, 40 minutes to ask questions.
Professor Justin Lin. Many of you know that Justin is one of the most well-renowned economists in PRC, has served in the World Bank and was the first non-Western chief economist of the World Bank. Justin, talking about One Belt One Road, or Belt and Road Initiative as it's officially dubbed in China, like the official mantras in Beijing go always win-win, beneficial. Like you would assume that China is engaged in sort of charity, helping its poorer neighbors to develop, building infrastructure and stuff. Could you explain to us the domestic economic reasons for China to launch Belt and Road Initiative? What are the selfish motives? Thanks. You have 7 minutes.
Okay, it's quite an honor for me to be able to participate in this panel and discuss one of the most important initiatives that has been undertaken by China. That is One Belt One Road Initiative. Before I give my interventions, I'd like to correct one thing. You said that the One Belt One Road is treated as unilateral, the charity to other countries. I think that's wrong. Because as you mentioned, China always emphasizes the One Belt One Road is a win-win for all the parties, including China. So it's not a charity, it's an initiative to explore the opportunity that can bring benefits to every country, including China. And why it can bring benefit to China, and why China, undertaking this initiative, I'd like to reflect from the experiences of China's transition started in 1979. As you know, at that time, China was one of the poorest countries in the world. But since 1979, the economic growth in China is a miracle, because China achieved 9.7% growth rate continuously for 37 years. And we never observed such a high growth rate to be sustained for so long, especially in a country with 1.3 billion population, with a country that has 1/5 of the global population. And the reason why China was able to do that, certainly, on the one hand, China has the reform to transit from a planning economy to a market economy. And the second thing is that China opening up itself to the world. And this kind of opening up strategies allow China to rely on domestic resources, domestic market for development. But simultaneously, China can explore the resources and the market, globally, and to contribute to the growth in China. And currently, China is a middle-income country with per capita GDP of $8,000 in 2016. But certainly, China has the aspiration to become a high-income country. And to become a high-income country, China needs to deepen the reform because on the transition process, China took a gradual approach, did not remove all the distortions simultaneously. But also China needs to deepening up the opening up to the world. And so China can continue to rely on domestic resources, domestic market, as well as global resources and global market for the growth. But because China has been so successful in the past 37 years, now China becomes the second largest economy in the world, measured by market exchange rate. But if we measured the economic size by purchasing power parity, China overtook US in 2014 to become the largest economy. But we know anyone trained a little bit with Marxism, we know economic foundation will influence its status in the world. And so under the current situation, US feel a little bit uncomfortable. And so took some initiative like pivotal, like rebalancing to the Pacific. And I try to build some kind of alliance to contain China's development. And certainly under the current situation, if China wanted to continue to opening up to integrate with the world, China needs to find an approach which not only help China to continue to open up, but also help other countries to be benefit from this process. And as you know, the OBERT, the One Belt One Road initiative, emphasizes the infrastructural connectivities. Because we know for any country to develop, infrastructure is a key. And we know most countries now have infrastructure bottlenecks. And if we can develop this kind of infrastructure connectivity, certainly that will allow every country to be better integrate with the global market as well as its domestic market. So that's consistent with the idea of a development rely on domestic market, domestic resources, as well as a development rely on global market and global resources. That was one of the pillars for the success in China. And I think that is also a pillar for every country to be successful in their pursuit for prosperity. And One Belt One Road, try to take initiative from the infrastructure connectivity and allow everyone to be part of this globalized world. And China take this initiative if it's accepted. Certainly China will be connected with the rest of the world, and this kind of contentment will not work. And China has some advantages to do that. Because in the past 37 years, China built up the most competitive construction material as well as engineer capacity. China currently produces more than half of the global steel. China produces more than half of the global cement. And we know to construct infrastructure, you need to have that. And also China has this engineer capacity in the international biddings. The construction of highway, the construction of high-speed train, China's cost is less than half of the competitors. And not only China has this capability, also China has $3 trillion of foreign exchange reserve. And to do this kind of construction, you need to have funds. And China each year saves more than 45% of its GDP. So not only China have a stock of foreign reserve can support, but China also have a flow of the resources to support the infrastructure. And as a result, every country, they wanted to improve their economic growth in order to create jobs, in order to generate prosperity for their people. And this initiative will assist every country to realize their dream. And as a result, so far, more than 30 countries have signed strategic partnership with China to engage in this One Belt, One Road initiative. And so certainly, if we realize this goal, this initiative, it's good for China, but it's also good for the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I hear you correctly, One Belt, One Road is partly the child of Obama administration and what you dubbed as containment policy or pivot to Asia. Okay, one of the major countries which has these connections with China and has signed to jointly develop One Belt, One Road is Russia. Станислав Сергеевич Воскресенский, заместитель.
Stanislav Sergeyevich Voskresensky, Deputy Minister of Economic Development, one of the key initiators and architects of Russian turn and connection. You were together with the Igor Ivanovich Shuvalov team at the initial initiative of this project. How does Russia react to the Chinese initiative of economic Silk Way? And the connection was born, and the working group was created, several meetings happened, and what exactly happened? What so miraculous happened during this almost 2 years? Yes, thank you, Alexander. By the way, at first you said that there is slight decline of interest, judging by the overwhelming audience, as much as there was overwhelming audience when Kudrin was member of the panel at the general plenary session. Now I'll tell you in more detail about this project. PRC has a large-scale project of economic Silk Way, and we always said that Russia has independent project, Eurasian Union, and dialogue with PRC was built in order to find harmonic development of all Eurasian space. This forum was found by our leaders, by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. In May 2015, there was signed declaration about connection of two projects on Eurasian space of Eurasian Committee. What are the elements? What's behind of these words? In our understanding, it is made of several things. First of all, it's joint realization of quite concrete projects in investment sphere in different industries, not only infrastructure, although it's most important in order to really connect Eurasian continent, but also in the other spheres, and I'll tell you about this slightly later. Second, institutional sphere is the network of agreements, one of which and major of which is the contract agreement. Eurasian Economic Commission is holding negotiations. I hope that Veronika will join us. It's not preferential agreement with PRC in the area of investment and services, but perhaps in the future it will be preferential agreement. As to, let's switch to concrete things, what happened during last year and a half. Let's be boring, and I'll give you a lot of numbers. Statistics of January and November, our bilateral trading exceeded $58 billion and grew by 1.6% in relation to the preceding year. It doesn't seem like impressive number, but as I was hinted by Chinese colleagues from the State Committee on Development of Reforms, Russia is the only country with which PRC had grown trade, because you know that the global trend, the global trade for different reasons is in decline. I mean the dollar expression, not physical volume. Let's see how the structure is changed of our trading, because the experts can object. Of course, the price for oil increased, so the trading increased, but it's not so. If you look at the structure, this share of mineral deposits was 76 down to 60%. Export grew mostly through the foods. By 25% grew export of food in October, November, due to processing of the pulp, machines and equipment, machinery and equipment, and that's about trade. Let's look at what's happening in the area of our investment collaboration. Number of projects were realized, and we're talking, I emphasize, not the agreement, not contracts, not intentions, but the projects with the construction sites where you come with money that are already scheduled. I'll mention just several of those because they're so popular and well known. This is partnership of our company Sibur and Sinopec. You know that in the middle of December there was a contract of Silkway Fund, and 10% of Silkway was purchased by Sibur. Joint development of Bystrinsky concentration plant. It's agricultural area in the seaside territory. It's also the project of tree timber processing, not so much in terms of volume, but it's important for Tatarstan, production of refrigerators, all kinds of projects. During such a short time, we're talking not about intentions, not about thoughts, not about plans. We're talking about of quite tangible results of this work. What's next? It seems that this question is more important because PRC is our strategic partner, of which President said many times, we are in the mode of work of rhythmical and stable collaboration. And next, we plan to have agreement on infrastructural projects on Eurasian space in the area of connection of Eurasian space and Silkway, and our colleagues in IEC, together with partners of Eurasian Union, has a number of such projects. Russia made proposal, so-called 20 projects of connection. They are considered by the Chinese side. These projects, as far as I know, are the core of industrial part of agreement according to which Eurasian Economic Commission is holding negotiations about. But what's the really significant step ahead of us is building in several industries the chains of added value. I'm saying not embedding, but building, because considering potential of Chinese and Russian economy, we are quite capable of creating products together and come to the global markets, considering that it's happening today and how trends of global economy changes. It's not a secret for anyone that at the summit of Asian countries, and Lagarde said that there's new wave of protectionism, and the countries today, any countries, and developing and developed countries, doing trade, they want to keep part of the added value in the territory of respectful countries to create new jobs. We also approach to foreign investments. That's why we're talking about finding several points that harmonically can be developed together with PRC, and this could be harmonical and logical evolutional continuation of our joint large project of connecting Eurasian Union and Silkway. We in Russia, when we discuss connection, most often speak about ourselves in Chinese. We're big guys. We speak about something. At the same time, Eurasian Union has a number of other countries, and these other countries, for instance, Kazakhstan, I'd like to overturn this statement. It never happened and cannot happen to have partners, Eurasian Union. And believe me, in this work, the contacts are most tight, and our actions we coordinate. And that's why IEC holds the most important negotiations about the agreement.
And what about the list of investment projects? Is it a common list? Well, of course, yeah. Well, as I'm saying, yes, the colleagues share this view. Our partners from the Chinese government, they share in this view. We have to group these projects together, and we are supposed to develop this jointly with Kazakhstan and other partners in Eurasian economic unity. Okay, Jamer. Jomart Otorbayev, former Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan. Let me ask you, please, what is your vision from your region? On the one hand, you are a member of the Eurasian Union. At a certain point, you had this barrier. You were trying to shut off the cheap Chinese imports. But now we're trying to harmonize different policies. And but what, in your view, in Central Asia, where this conjunction is going to take place and where the Silk Route is being built, how are you going to develop relations with different big countries? On one big nation on the one hand and the other big nation. Thank you. First of all, let me say thanks for this invitation. This is a unique forum, the GAIDAR Forum, and I think it sort of pushes us towards dealing with ambitious issues. So as we are sitting here at these sessions and we hear these figures, 0.5%, 1%, 1.5%. So we are talking about the economic growth of Russia in the nearest future. Just recently, Kudrin has said that we need to ensure a breakthrough, and there is a huge set of different proposals on that. 90%, 95% of all the discussions are around internal reserves of the Russian economy. Even the fact that we were given the smallest room, perhaps, in this building implies that, well, maybe it's not so important. Let them talk a little bit and then they disperse. But in fact, there is a huge potential for the growth, the external potential. I mean, external growth of the Russian economy. When we talk about the external growth, I'm talking about Asia, first of all. In 30 years, Asia will account for almost half of the global GDP. And when we talk about Asia, we mainly speak about China. This is quite obvious. There are no other alternatives. Well, of course, the Russian Federation, the Russian economy could really make a breakthrough. I'm not talking about 1%, 1.5%. At this forum, we're talking about a qualitative breakthrough in the economy. The externally, we do not have any other alternatives. We just, the only way is to work as close as possible with China. Conjunction is the right word here. And it's quite obvious for everyone that all other countries, except for Russia, account for a very small, in the Eurasian Union, for a very small figure in GDP. That's why the Russian position is of key importance in terms of this conjunction, this connection. Well, provided, of course, with all the respect to other members of this union. Let's talk about the qualitative change in the Russian position on the external markets. Asia, predominantly China. We are talking about China. So what Central Asia is planning to get from that? This is quite obvious. Anyone knows how many people in the world live in the landlocked countries? They do not have a way out to the ocean. 5%. Eritrea is now moved away from Ethiopia, so it's now closer to 7% in Ethiopia because there is no economic activity there. Logistic services cost 3 times more as compared to other countries. So it's quite obvious that returning to this beautiful Silk Route times will only be possible if Central Asia becomes a transit region. The initiative of the Kazakhstan's president, who has been implementing this quite efficiently, I would say. So this conjunction will make it possible to get these real benefits for the Central Asian countries. That's why we are really interested in that. That's why, economically, we are, objectively speaking, we are so far a little bit weak so far, so we cannot influence this process without Russia. As Stanislav has just mentioned, 2 years ago, these conjunction questions were announced, but let me be more critical. We have got together here not just to praise each other. So right now, what we have, the just bilateral agreements. The bilateral agreements will continue to work. But where is the added value of the multilateral approach? I do not see this in European Commission. As I met with the chairman, with his deputy, they don't have many resources for that. We are really banking on the Ministry of Economic Development. We do have hopes in connection with that, so we could deal more seriously with that. This conjunction, this connection is a linear combination of both sides, of both parties. Now let me emphasize the question of soft power. It's not only talking about tunnels or motorways. It's much broader. There's a philosophy behind the world in the 21st century. And very few people talk about this. Number three, everyone is complaining about lack of finances, no money. I hear this talk all the time. So we arranged the panel discussion in the Eurasian Commission, but I think it was a very lukewarm discussion. We didn't manage to resolve anything. China, superpower number one in the world, the future number one power in the world, and it's close to our borders. We border on that. Soon the Chinese GDP, per capita GDP, will outpace Russia's. So there's the export potential. That's what the export potential. Weak ruble, the market capacity, the closeness of China, cultural ties that since Soviet time have been, we remember these ties wholeheartedly, I should say. China has set up scores of institutes dealing with the Silk Road, and I visited that country many times to understand how they treat this. They are quite serious about that. I apologize. Maybe my colleagues will correct me. I don't know how to do this, but let's discuss this. We should know how we should go about this. When Deng Xiaoping said we should be modest when we are medium or small, but we cannot pretend that we are mice when we are elephants. China now is moving out towards external markets. Well, of course, there are certain difficulties here on this way. But there is kind of obsolete mentality here that somebody's trying to dominate in Central Asia. They're trying to buy our countries, geopolitical chessboard. But in the conditions of the fourth industrial revolution, where these conjunctions are absolutely borderless, they are endless, we cannot put up walls on the way of conjunction. So I think this political speculation should be a thing of the past, and we have to get rid of them somehow. And that's, in closing, what I would like to say, how we can promote, how we can facilitate all these processes. I've worked in the government, Rat and Stanislav, and, well, of course, there were a lot of day-to-day routine, but talking about the qualitative leap forward, I think think tanks should join this process. There are serious institutions in China and in Russia who can work in this way. But everybody's complaining about lack of money. But that's a small portion of money is needed to ensure that think tanks such as Gaidar Institute, other institutes could act as advisors to the government structures to ensure a qualitative breakthrough in this conjunction. For example, there is a whole institution of think tanks that has been set up including Russia. And so these organizations provide an agenda. They prepare an agenda that can be discussed, and there are a lot of quality proposals that can be discussed there. That's why our conference is called the Search for Priorities. So, Alexander, I would like to ask you, indeed, as Russia's external priorities, Russia and the world, we should put the creation and promotion of the new Silk Way as our priority way of development. As a representative of the think tank community, I should probably say that there is no money and will try to ask the government representatives to ask for money. But talking about American think tank, let's talk about the program that there is no money. And Mr. Kalimetov is now involved in the creation of a new center in Astana. And these people, Kairat Kalimbetov has gone a long way, is in his role of the manager of the International Financial Center in Astana. So what I'm sure they will be able to set up a kind of a law firm, a legal offshore. Mr. Kalimbetov, you've been head of the central bank, head of the administration. So from your viewpoint, how these local financial centers may fit into the post-Soviet space in terms of financing. Somebody is supposed to pay for this infrastructure. China has much wealth, a lot of money, but it's not endless either. So how we can raise Chinese money to make them work for our global projects here and in Kazakhstan? Thank you very much. I wanted to start, first of all, on a very optimistic note regarding the Silk Route. I think that what the Chinese government calls One Belt, One Route, I think it's really a mega project. It's not only physical structure, but soft infrastructure involving new technologies. I do think that what we see on the highest level, the heads of the Eurasian Economic Union, that as they agreed to work together to combine two integration projects. I think, and that's really something, We understand the political role of the Russian Federation there and Chinese role. We understand these are two friendly win-win projects, but since Kazakhstan is not an essential part of is an essential portion of the Eurasian Economic Union, Kazakhstan has already started implementing this project, and we have already done our part of this work as we connect Chinese border and Turkmenistan's border, building a railway, thousands of kilometers of railways, also Aktau, Caspian seaport, expanding the dry ship port in Kargus. So part of this project is the international highway, Western Europe, West China, about 3,000 kilometers that runs across Kazakhstan. But also we see that the friendly position of other countries could really contribute to the increase of its capacity. For China, this is first of all the question of, as a former chief economist of the World Bank said, is the question of connectivity. The connectivity is the big issue. Economic and defensive issue. I think for China, of course, 85% of all connections account for this maritime routes. So to a certain extent, maybe this issue may seem a little bit artificial, but I think it's just a God's gift that we have this chance to re-establish the Silk Route, and there is no contradiction to Eurasian economic integration. China has already declared 3 priority countries: Pakistan, Iran, and Kazakhstan, which implied that the specific infrastructure projects would begin to be implemented. Pakistan, as we heard, about $45 billion is ready to invest in the project. As for other countries, this is a question of preparation. I think China has been very consistent in this as they begin to deal with these issues. What exactly they've done already? So now getting back to the first question, all these infrastructural projects, of course, should bring a return on investment. We're not going to be involved in charity in this sense. All these projects should be interesting and should be profitable. And in this case, many institutions will join this: the Silk Route Foundation, the International Global new Asian banks for infrastructure investments, BRICS banks. I think most of these banks will work on that. The Central Bank of Hong Kong has recently created an organization which will begin to structure this project. China has already opened some credit lines to this core. As for Kazakhstan, we already have unilateral and multilateral and bilateral agreements. The neighboring country, China is a neighboring country, about 2,500 kilometers border. So one of the good opportunities would, of course, be the International Financial Center, of course. As we know, the examples of the global financial centers, no one is going to compete with them, but there are regional hubs such as Dubai in the region, or Abu Dhabi, or Singapore in Malaysia, Hong Kong. So we believe that it's probably the place where it will be possible to provide guarantees for investments. The British common law to govern these processes, and the setting up the financial center, so that we may become a kind of a third place for such international financial center. It's not going to be to the detriment of other financial centers, and the former Prime Minister was saying we should use these opportunities. Can you tell me, please, for example, I represent the Chinese government. Well, talking about the companies who are going to build this infrastructure, foundations, and so on and so on, why should they bring this to Astana or to Moscow rather than building this in Shanghai or in other places? Or if you don't want in Shanghai, you can. Why should go to Hong Kong? Because they have a transparent jurisdiction with a long history. Well, we understand that Hong Kong or Shanghai, they're growing financial centers. Well, of course, but the projects themselves are built in Central Asia, in the Eurasian Economic Union. So these are guarantees that exist within these countries. It's highly important for the investors to have guarantees in the place where the investments are made. That will contribute to mitigating risks and cutting costs. But of course, I think that will contribute.
Japan is number 3 economy with huge expertise of building infrastructure around the world. It's driving force behind the Asian Development Bank, with decades of participation in infrastructure connectivity building, including in Central Asia. But it's really notably absent from any discussion on Belt and Road Initiative. Will that stay that way, or does Japan look at some form of engagement, including working together with China and Russia?
Spasiba, Mr. Chairman. As an economist, I'm going to discuss One Belt, One Road initiatives from 3 perspectives. One is the object for infrastructure building. Second is a coordination institutions. 3 is the financing for these initiatives. So at first, I am discussing Chinese response to One Belt, One Road initiatives. According to my understanding, it's the resolutions for overcapacities of basic industrial goods in China. Steel, cement, petrochemicals, such kind of basic industrial goods are overcapacity in China. Almost half of their capacity to make steel existed in China. So a lot of conflict, trade conflict is now coming to their export to the EU and to the United States. In this situation, very brand new proposal initiatives were presented by Mr. Xi Jinping. So in this situation, rebalancing of demand and supply should be discussed. In the latter half of 19th century, as you know, we had a rebalancing problem between demand and supply, especially in Europe. So in this situation, in order to have the very concrete framework, we have to borrow the framework of Vladimir. Not Vladimir Putin, but Vladimir Lenin. So in the latter half of 19th centuries, gaps between demand and supply continued because maldistribution of income continued among working classes and capitalists. In that situation, Karl Marx mentioned revolution by working classes in order to rebalance the demand and the supply. And after that, Vladimir Lenin presented the theme of imperial wars. In developed countries, a lot of capitalists couldn't find the market for their overcapacities of goods. So they invaded the developing countries. It's the colonization of the market. Through this kind of colonization, they could export their overcapacities to them. Of course, China didn't want to invade the emerging economies, of course. So they presented the theme of infrastructure building initiatives. That's very good. But counterparts should be discussed from the viewpoint of the coordination of the object. So let's pick up the example, the one country in Central Asia. They want to diversify their industrial sectors because they depended on a lot on hydrocarbon export. So they want to diversify the industrial basis. So infrastructure will be needed for the diversification. However, from Chinese side, overcapacity is a problem, and rebalancing for that overcapacity is presenting the One Belt, One Road initiatives. So second perspective, so coordinating institution is necessary for the long-term perspectives of building infrastructures. So IBRD or ADB, so both of them made a lot of feasibility studies. So through such kind of feasibility studies, they want to coordinate the objectives of one side and the other side. But China is now presenting AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So in AIIB, Chinese influence is a very dominant one. So according to my understanding, AIIB will not be able to play the role of coordinating of the intentions of both sides. That's my understanding. And the third point I have to mention, financing. So in order to consecutive infrastructure building, financing is very important, as you know. So for the project, repayment of the debt is, if such kind of repayment were not done, so continuation of the building of infrastructure will be stopped. That's a problem. And if they want to have investment fund, so repayment for their dividends for their investment is very important to have the consecutive initiatives for building the infrastructure in these areas. So today I mentioned 3 points. One is the objectives. Second is coordinating institutions. Third is the financing. All of these problems should be discussed among countries and participants who are the members of One Belt, One Road initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, to wrap this up, I turn to Professor Hung from Johns Hopkins University. I think connectivity was very important in this part of the world in medieval times. That's where the Silk Road was born. How important is it now, and which kind of lessons can be driven from the investment and trade development activities in this region, which may be relevant today as we discuss Belt and Road Initiative?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thanks for this opportunity to. It's really my honor, and I'm humbled to sit side by side with so many distinguished panelists. And I think I'm the only one here that is not involved in any policy-making process, so I can take the liberty to become the boring historian, to talk about things that happened in the past and centuries ago, and what we can learn from these past histories. I think the idea of One Belt, One Road proposed by President Xi Jinping in China is a great idea. I am a big fan of economic integration, that in the economic integration, if it succeeds, always benefit everybody involved, not only China, but all countries and powers involved in the arrangement. But looking back in history, we can draw some lessons and also see how new the challenges that this One Belt, One Road and New Silk Road project is going to face, and how we'll have to figure out new way to overcome these challenges to make it successful. In the past, that it is important because by naming the project Silk Road or New Silk Road, there's a conscious attempt to establish parallel to the old Silk Road, that nobody expect there's going to be silk really traded in this area with this project, but we call it Silk Road because of the past. And in the centuries of old Silk Road, that we see that the long distance trade across Eurasia went up and down periodically. And then the Silk Road thrived when there was some single political power that managed to establish hegemony in the region. And when the region disintegrated into rival powers and the Silk Road receded and became too dangerous for merchants to move around. And so the old Silk Road reached its peak of prosperity under Pax Mongolica, that when the Mongols managed to establish a kind of political unity across this space and then invest in hostile highway, roads, and posts and bridge, and also reduce the political risk for the merchants traveling across long distance. And then this old Silk Road declined with the collapse of the Mongol Empire when the region became zones of rival powers, and then it revived again actually that with a Northern route after Russia expanded into Siberia and reached the Far East and signed a treaty and fixed the border with the Qing Empire in the 17th century, and then the Northern Silk Road across Siberia all the way to Moscow and Europe thrive. So we see this pattern of stability and under some hegemony is quite essential in old times to have this economic long-distance trade possible and viable. In the 21st century, I think all powers and all countries involved in the region, none of the powers are thinking about attaining hegemony or domination by themselves in this region because it is not desirable, it is not quite possible. We are in a kind of a multipolar world right now. So the challenge is unseen before, that is how to establish a kind of a multilateral partnerships with the different big and not so big powers with mutual respect to work out an arrangement that we didn't see it before, we didn't try that before. And the maritime Silk Road across the ocean is more complicated. Not actually, it's less complicated, that it rose with the rise of the Western colonial power. And even today, you see that all the choke points in the maritime route from the Red Sea, Persian Gulf to the Strait of Malacca was, you like it or not, the reality is that it is dominated by one particular power, that is the US. So in the New Silk Road, we face a challenge of how to build a kind of a multilateral multipolar governing structures to secure peace and stability and cooperation and healthy competition in this area. And I think that some good attempt has been tried, of course, that in the introduction abstract of the panel, it mentioned the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And it is about counterterrorism, but it is a good example of how multilateral organization can be done. And also the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is also another good attempt initiated by China but also participated by many other countries, that you look at China investment in Africa, China investment in Latin America is mostly done through bilateral arrangement through the China Development Bank and so on and so forth. And China also has a bilateral financial arrangement, that is the Silk Road Fund, to finance project. But besides that, China initiated AIIB, which is a good attempt, to my view, to establish a multilateral structures to lead to a kind of the multipolar, multilateral, rule-based governing of this Silk Road project. So we see signs of hopes and good development that lead to success, but the success is not inevitable, and there's some challenge, political, geopolitical challenge that need to be overcome before it can be successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, now I have some time to torture you with some direct questions. I will pose pretty brief questions and require pretty brief answers, and then we open it to the floor. Justin, a question to you. If we look at the economics, like you mentioned many times, the connectivity, infrastructure, transcontinental logistics. If we look into the economics of many of these logistics projects, like train that China launched to Europe, first, it's more expensive than the maritime route. B, that would make sense if you move stuff produced in Xinjiang or somewhere in Western China to Europe. Maybe using railroad makes economic sense. Problem is that Xinjiang doesn't export that much. And then if you go deep into the balance sheet of localities like Chunxin or Xinjiang, you see that a lot of these trains are actually subsidized. Second part is all the over-investment into infrastructure is dubbed as one of the major problems in the Chinese development model. That's what Prime Minister Li Keqiang says all the time. That's what Xi Jinping sometimes says, that we have built a lot of infrastructure that we actually either don't need or we don't know which cash flows will serve that. So is there enough appetite for China to export that model to other regions? And how do we secure that these projects are really profitable?
Well, before I answer your question, I want to correct one statement by our co-panelist, Tanaka. And he mentioned the main reason for colonization in the world was the excess capacity in the industrialized country in late 19th century. And I think it was not a fact, because colonization started much earlier than the 19th century. We know that from the 15th century, 16th century, 18th century, colonization has been there for so many parts of the world. So that was a historical fact, not correctly interpreted. And we know that colonization was not mainly for expanding markets. Colonization was mainly for controlling territory and monopolize in the resources. So that's also another fact I think we need to recognize. And he mentioned China has a large capacity in steel and cement. That was a fact. But it does not necessarily mean China wanted to export the excess capacity. And I can give one evidence. Last year, China cut 10% of our coal production. As a result, international prices for coal jumped 4 times. And so from this fact, we know excess capacity is something related to business cycle. Currently, China has some excess capacity, but US also has that. Other countries also has that. And we did not see other countries, because of their excess capacity, they promote something like One Belt, One Road initiative. So I think that this kind of fact we need to recognize, because otherwise people will interpret this initiative is a win-win for every country as an initiative that China wants to dump our excess capacity. So that's one fact. I'm sorry, I need to correct. And secondly, to your question, further, this kind of infrastructural connectivity can pay off. For example, the rail connection from China to Europe through Eurasian, I think it makes sense in many areas. Because if we rely on maritime cargo, it takes about at least 2 months from China to reach Europe. But through railroad, we can cut down the time down to less than 2 weeks. And certainly the cost of the railroad is higher than the boat. But it's much more, it's less expensive than airplane. And there's so many goods actually, in the past, they cannot use air cargo. They need to go through the sea route, but it takes so long. And now with the railroad connectivities, they find it's a better alternative than either approaches. So since the railroad connectivity being proposed, now the cargo increased more than 10 times. In the past, about 2 years ago, every 1 week you have one cargo train from, let's say, Chongqing to Europe. Now every day they have a train. So that shows the competitiveness of this kind of infrastructure connectivity through the road. And you mentioned it would be desirable to go from Xinjiang, but actually now the most active connectivity is not from Xinjiang. Actually, from the eastern part of China through the railroad connectivity to the Europe, because the cutting down in the time and the competitiveness of the cost. And whether the infrastructure is excessive or not. It very much depends on the growth rate. For example, in 1998, during the East Asian financial crisis, and China used infrastructure as a way of counter-cyclical measures. And at that time, China built, the highway from 5,000 kilometers. Now, up to now, China have about more than 100,000 kilometers. But if you go to most of the highway system in China, it's overloaded. So I think as long as you can maintain high enough growth rate, then infrastructure will be utilized, and infrastructure construction need to be ahead of the economic growth in order to release the bottleneck of growth. And I think that many countries around the world, they have the opportunity to grow rapidly if the bottleneck of the infrastructure is released. So I think that we cannot judge the investment based on the current, economic activity. We need to judge the investment on the future activities. And for that, certainly you also need to select the project by project, make a good planning, make a good implementation. And as long as you have those kind of criteria, I think most of the infrastructure project will pay off.
Thanks. Sure.
So why did Vladimir Lenin write an article, a book on imperial wars? He reflected the latter half of 19th century's developed countries, developed capitalist countries fight for the market. So this is a reality. So analysis, framework analysis from Vladimir Lenin came from such kind of reflections. So this is the intervention.
Okay, thank you so much. We will, as this is Gaidar Forum, we will not really study the Lenin's legacy properly. Джамарт, смотрите.
Jamaat, for countries such as Kyrgyzstan, well, in fact, I think we might see this as a universal problem. Well, talking about the Chinese infrastructure, we know this from our experience. Normally, there are Chinese subcontractors, Chinese workers, financial tie-ins, financial investment guarantees, and there are even good profits. Moscow-Kazan project has been stalling for a number of years because the Chinese negotiators have been very strict about return on investment. We were saying that Beijing-Tibet railway operates at a loss. No, that's not right. It's not true. We are not saying that. So what do you think? What are the instruments? What are the actual tools to ensure that it will be more profitable for our countries? Or we are saying that, okay, let them build these roads, these railways in any way, but if China, even if China takes all the benefits, even if it uses its workforce, maybe we shouldn't build these railways at all. I think we should not be too euphoric about that, too overjoyed that China is building these projects as a charity or just to extend its political sway. The Chinese people are very pragmatic. They are government is very practical, and I think if so, they just if they believe that there is no traffic, it's not profitable. It's not make sense to build that. So you should provide guarantees or increase traffic. Our countries work under state guarantees, but in the meantime, they understand that this approach is it's sort of traditional, but it's becoming obsolete. It's losing steam. On the other hand, the Chinese money are very cheap, and very few countries like that in the world. And so our countries should understand that we have to think about the prospective ways of development. Indeed, what I suggest right now is that some think tanks should start acting from the Chinese side, from the 5 members of Eurasian community. They should engage in a kind of a brainstorming, because the traditional tools are no longer relevant, are no longer working for loan guarantees. So in this case, we will say this One Belt, One Road will not be profitable. What is it going to bring to our countries? So I think there is a kind of a gap here, a discrepancy, because the countries do not talk to each other. The governments send letters, exchange programs. This is a kind of a traditional approach that existed there, but what we need to do, we need to to think about a mechanism within the framework of the Silk Road project, of some innovative mechanisms. China has said that it's a priority project. They announced this in Kazakhstan, that it's profitable to them. Let's look for new mechanisms of joint work. Stanislav Sergeyevich, you were saying that it's not true, but it's a simple example. Moscow-Kazan high-speed railway. So we've been discussing this issue for several years, and it seems like it's stalling in the same place. Even with Japan, after the recent visit by Vladimir Putin, there is more dynamic in relations. Export of meat, for example, and so on and so forth. I think that this is probably even more dynamic as compared to what's going on with China in our relations. So maybe we should forget about the Chinese subject and let's switch over to Japan. So what's taking place? Now, as for the high-speed railway, we've only been discussing this for 2 years. It's a major project. It's a large-scale project. Mr. Kalemberov was quite right. So these projects should be economically viable, and that's why the Russian railways and the Ministry of Transport, they are negotiating. They're gradually moving towards each other. They're completing the design process, engineering work. So these are all the issues that are dealing with that they take time, as you should understand. Even if it were an internal project, they would have taken the same time, As for Japan, China, and the Asia-Pacific region as a whole, I think all the panelists were saying that this is the most dynamically, the fast-developing macro region in the world, so Russia should take advantage of that. I think this agenda has appeared not because of some academic or political will. The task of our economy is to diversify as much as possible, to increase the living standards of our people. Today, the Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Oreshkin, was saying that even much of the foreign investments were focused on the internal growth, but there is no more such growth internally. That's why the companies that spring up should understand that they have to work in conditions of competition inside the country and also in the world market. So as to create more jobs, we need cooperation and external markets, and first of all, the Asia-Pacific markets. And we've been doing quite a lot in this respect. This refers not only to Japan and China. We've had a major deal with Singapore on Changi's airport. The Changi company is a major world airport operator, where they are going to build something in Vladivostok. Hopefully Vladivostok will build something from that project. So we've also updated the double taxation treaties with Singapore, China, and Hong Kong. Now we have equal conditions for all parties, and we built adjusted this system in such a manner that the Russian companies can set up holding structures in Asian markets, feeling themselves much not less comfortable than foreign businessmen. So now they can. All the conditions have been equalized for marketplace in Asia. 58 agreements have been signed with Japan. Many memoranda. There are specific deals. In the 13th of December, Japan made a decision to open up its market for Russian beef and pork, and also the poultry negotiations are underway. The Ministry of Finance agreements are underway. About $1 billion between GBCO and RF, Direct Investment Fund. With Gazprom Bank, we signed a platform. The Far East Foundation agreement is on its way. Now the cooperation with Japan is not only boils down to the tapping for mineral reserves or pharmaceuticals, the agriculture, a number of projects precisely. Our Japanese colleagues have been very fast in this sense as they were building added value chains so as to enter the new markets in the Asia-Pacific region and the world markets. There's an interesting project, IBE company, that's developed a unique technology for artificial intelligence jointly with Fujitsu. They've creating the product for the world market. So all these things, well, it will take too much time for me to describe all that. The first agreement was between Russia and Vietnam on the free trade zone is now started to work. We also had certain developments with Indonesia on investments in Indonesia. So it will take me a lot of time to speak about that. So there's quite a broad agenda on Asia-Pacific. But China is the major economy in the region, and of course we are going to move ahead consistently. Okay, thank you. And there's a question for you. Let me add also at this point that in your questions, Alexander, I hear a certain degree of skepticism. You're a bit skeptical. I know that you're quite a big specialist in China, but I think, first of all, there are certain things, given things. Those who worked with China understand that the programs that have been announced will be implemented. The implementation is a very long-term and very consistent programs. I've visited China many times. It's not just a desire of the bureaucracy somewhere on top. Every region, there is a competition. The regions compete among each other to participate in these programs. But of course, there's no 100% guarantee. The Silk Route may be diverted southward, and the investments may bypass us. It depends on how we are going to be ready for that. China is doing this not only in Central Asia, it's also actively promoting in Latin America, in Africa, and in Europe. So on the whole, as we heard from the answers of our Chinese colleagues, there is a maritime route indeed, and it brings certain returns on the investments, but for China does not want to be dependent on this route entirely, on the sea route. So for bigger economies in Eurozone and China, it's highly important if we are going to be part of this transit, not just a simple transit, but somehow if we try to add create some added value, some other chains, I think that will be really important to us. And I would like to say in connection that it's a win-win-win situation. Indeed, for Russia and for the entire Eurasian community, it's highly important that the Central Asian region, about 70 million population, would prosper economically, because poverty would not be for the benefit of this country. So we need to work towards that. And for China, it's maybe some other tasks. For the Western community, for the West, it's a possibility to operate on the new market, selling their technology. So it's a win-win-win situation for all the parties. So let me remind you about one book from Johns Hopkins University, Frederick Starr. There was a book which is called Education Lost. It is now available in Russia. Which says that the Central Asia, for 400 years, the Central Asia was the global financial center. It was a long time ago, indeed, but nevertheless. So I think there are such ambitions now that can be nurtured right now in Central Asia. Central Asia can provide an opportunity of becoming a regional investment hub. So I think the Chinese investments are welcome, Japanese investments are welcome. But what is important at this point, I think that you should not have expectations, over-optimistic optimisms, but I think this project will be successful in the end. Just a few comments on that, please. Now, regarding this academic argument, the academic discussion about imperialism, this is a Gaidar Forum. That's the title. It's a Gaidar Forum. I happen to know personally Yegor Gaidar, and well, you might have your own associations with the name of Gaidar, but my association with Gaidar was that it was a unique person, open up to anything new. He was not a dogmatic person. He had a very flexible mindset with a very powerful internal core. And so that I would welcome such discussions and even the different views and counterpoised views. So yeah, I see that this kind of Marxist past is now seen in our speakers. So there are two messages here, so we can debate around that, and then we'll ask questions. First of all, about these programs, whether they can be implemented. In 2013, there was a third plenum of the Communist Party, and they adopted a clear-cut program of economic reforms. The trackers for this program were saying that they managed to implement only 5%, which is related to a few things, because there are some contradictions there, because you need to ensure the economic growth and overall employment, and nobody wants to invest in infrastructure projects, but if you cease to invest in infrastructure, the people, there will be a lot of unemployed, so that's why you have to do something about this. And the second is the fight against corruption. Because of the corruption, the Chinese bureaucracies are in fact paralyzed by that struggle. Is this a threat to the Silk Route? Looking back and seeing the Chinese success, and we think that China is going to develop at the same pace with the next 30 years, but it seems like it may be at the point of bifurcation, and it may not be able to sustain this growth within the next 30 years. The next, you mentioned a beautiful highway that approaches Orenburg, and then it just ends up somewhere in the Russian expenses, and nothing will happen after that. So we need to do something about this. As we are on the same integration outlines, you have a beautiful project, and that's what Kyrgyzstan's prime minister was saying. So maybe Russia will not be able to continue that. You are a kind of a agent provocateur, acting as a provoking us. No, they work in other agencies. Well, looking at the Chinese economy, I think that's probably the main question to the economists. Many American experts believe that there are problems in the Chinese economy. Of course, all major economies, even in Eurozone, they also face problems. All countries face these problems. But there is a McKinsey research project that says that the center of economic gravity is shifting towards Asia. It's just this plain reason is demography, the new markets and new technologies implementation. That China has made a real breakthrough on a digital market. That's at an entirely new level of investment in academic science and technologies, in new industries, and I believe that's the second economy in the world, in fact, So in any case, maybe some may be critical, but for 30, 40 years, the country has been developing at a double-digit figures of economic growth. So I believe what you were saying about political modernization, other processes, but in fact, that will not be a major obstacle. The program will be implemented, will be consistent, and I think the important point of this program, it's not just a unilateral program that somebody will come and do everything. That will depend much on us. It's up to us, whether we are going to create proper conditions rather than problems or obstacles for them. So in this sense, the role of the Eurasian Economic Community is huge. So because, in fact, it's a big territory. It's one customs territory, no borders, no bureaucracy, so we can really implement this in a very good manner. As regards some criticism, in fact, It's quite an open, transparent dialogue within the frame of bilateral relations, Eurasian track. You know, it's quite open. Well, I'm sure that Moscow-Kazan high-speed railway will be built eventually, and just as the motorways, these are all puzzles of one big infrastructural idea. So I believe the Eurasian space is an important part of the world economy, and it should occupy its worthy place in the international system of labor. Just one brief comment on that score.
Самому Китаю. Почему? Ну, вот на китайском их страна называется Срединная империя.
China is quite a challenge. The China has name of the Middle Empire. China prospered a long time because of the internal market. And even now, visiting China, I noticed that people still focus inside themselves, its colossal market, and they don't want to move anywhere. And it seems that there is a problem how China, for the first time in its history, seriously will be working on economic expansion. And here we need to help China somewhat, how to make it so that we don't damage, don't injure, and make win-win situation. And here again, I suggest that we create some kind of the ground for discussion. China needs to be helped to properly work on investment projects in the global scale.
I'm glad that there is quite a lot of discussion about markets, about profitability of the infrastructure. So as a principle, that the high-speed rail, ports, warehouse, highway, these infrastructures is profitable so far as there are enough people, but more important, enough goods, TV, cell phone, toys, garment to move around both ways. If you have the infrastructure, but in the end, there are not enough goods moving around, then it's not going to be profitable. So the essential point here is markets. It seems that Lenin still have some currency here, and I'm a big fan of Lenin. And his economic analysis is quite good. But why the big power lead to invade in each other market and invade other countries for markets? One precondition is that this big power back home, they are not doing very well in treating the working class right. So they don't have the purchasing power back home to buy the product they produce, so they need to go out and invade new markets. So the social democratic solution or alternative to war and imperial rivalry is that everybody do more social goods redistribution so that the mass can develop the purchasing power to buy each other good, and then there's a expanding pie of consumption that everybody can peacefully share and enjoy. And then now behind it is a bigger problem, a bigger question, step beyond Eurasia. It is about the whole world. That's how we can sustain globalization when Western world, US and Europe, are going to kind of a more protectionist mode, because China and Japan and many other East Asian exporters, they are part of the globalization game as a producer of consumer goods to Europe and US, while importing a lot of raw materials, components, machines, commodities from others. And I think this trade structure of Japan and China is quite similar in the sense that they have a huge trade surplus with Europe and US, but they are running pretty much a lot of the trade deficit with most other countries, commodity exporter. So now as some would say that Americans are the consumers of the last resort, and it is American consumerism that have been driving globalization. Now when US and Europe might be moving back to protectionism, then they cannot be the consumer of last resort, and we are continuing to pursue economic integration without TPP, without all these American-led structures. That the key here is to how to develop a consumption market besides US and Europe within Eurasia, to make the goods not only commodities and natural resources, but also consumer goods flowing around in different directions. And I think to develop the consumption market in Eurasia, that a lot of wealth, income redistribution, and social service, social goods and collective goods need to be achieved, and I think it is the key.
Thanks. Okay, I'm tempted to ask you many further torturing questions, but I want to give the chance to the audience. So, у нас примерно 30 минут. Давайте...
We have about 30 minutes. Let's try to limit. All right, you'll run away because you're busy. One question and introduce yourself. Microphones are in the back.
Master of Global Public Policy Program here at RENEPA. My question is a public policy question, a global public policy question. I think perhaps we've not paid enough attention today to the notion of China's One Belt, One Road strategy as a geostrategic strategy of an entirely new order, because it focuses, above all, as you've all said very clearly, on finance, investment, infrastructure, on real things, not on ideology. And the heart of this, in some ways, is that it's that phrase you've all used again and again, win-win. I think China invented win-win in the modern political dialogue. And I think they understand it very well. I think the rest of the world doesn't. The rest of the world tends to see win-win as meaning, well, we win, but you also win. But the essence of win-win is we win because you also win. Now, the United States, for instance, is still, and Russia to some extent, although less, are still back in the Cold War mentality. And the Cold War mentality was win-lose. It was a zero-sum game. And we've just elected a president, unfortunately, whose very well-documented business career was based on the concept not just of win-lose, but I win and the rest of you lose. So this is very ominous for the future. But my question is, should we not look at China's strategy, and our colleagues from Central Asia have been very clear on this, that is a strategy that really makes win-win come alive as a collective globalization strategy for the future? Thank you.
Question is addressed to whom? Anyone. Justin.
Well, we are in a globalized world, and we have an opportunity to achieve prosperity for all. And to do that, certainly, we need to have a new thinking, new ideas. And we should not be trapped by the old thinking, old ideas. And fundamentally, every country hope they will grow, their people will enjoy their life, and I think win-win is the way to achieve that. And I think many people still have this Cold War mentalities. They like to win, but they don't want the other people to win. They like to win on the basis of other people's loss. But in effect, those kind of approach cannot be sustained. For example, now the president elected in the US want to go into protectionism, isolation, but those kind of approach at the end will make American people to pay a high cost, much higher cost than this kind of globalized approach. And I'm sure people will learn a lesson once they found those kind of rhetorics does not work.
Okay.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Mikhail Korostikov, Kommersant newspaper. In order to understand what a successful Silk Way and the connection on Eurasian space, you can compare it to how this project is made in different regions. In particular, in the middle of the last year, as far as Silk Way Fund invested 3 projects. First is 10% of Sibur, second is construction of a power station in Pakistan, and the third, they helped Chinese company, I don't remember the name, to buy Shinpirelli from Italians. It's quite strange set of investments for the fund that works. And also Yamal SPG, Yamal LNG. I'd like to address question to Justin. In different regions, how does collaboration of these countries within Silk Way project were able to achieve successful results? Thank you. By the way, as Kommersant newspaper, you need to say that 50% of projects of Silk Way Fund related to Russia. We certainly do this. Justin.
Well, I think country ownership is very important. Certainly, we need to have a joint effort, but any project cannot be imposed from China or from any other country. And because every country knows what they need the most. They know where is the bottleneck the best. And so this Silk Road initiative is an initiative for win-win, and we need to respect country ownership.
Okay.
Вот, опять же, вот все наши вопросы.
Once again, all our questions and discussion, difference between short-term and long-term approach. Also remember classics. One Chinese classic said, too little time passed since revolution time in France in order to assess results. That's approach, that's long-term, and it's for centuries ago. I think even mid-term and short-term we'll see many projects that were mentioned. Lenin seems to have interesting quotation like this. I'd like to introduce Anna Tikhonova. I'm from Singapore Master Program University. I'd like to support you in your tricky questions, and I, as the specialist in power, when I hear the history of Russian-Chinese relationship, I have a caricature of the relationship between Russia and China in Sila Sibiri, Power of Siberia. So I have a question rather to you, Alexander, and to Mr. Atarbayev as well. How to make it so that joint projects, they really attract think tanks, and to make sure that this is not imposed decision.
Are actually interested, and how to make sure that these projects, they lead not to the enrichment of a dozen of known companies, but to the regional development. Спасибо.
Thank you. Jamaat, please, you. Absolutely correct. China has got excessive capacity and financial resources. What we have to do in the recipient countries is to organize demand so that it's not something artificial that came and that nobody expected. I'll give you an example of excessive capacity. In Central Asia, there were protests because there were talks about dirty production facilities are being imported because someone declared that without explanation what it is. Instead of starting the process of discussion among society members, what do we need within Silk Way framework? We need to turn the picture upside down when it's demand-driven, and recipient countries will understand why it's so needed. Not just governments or presidents, but society understands, yes, it's important, and China also needs to understand this. For now, communicating with them, I can see that this position is not clearly understood. Many projects in China and other countries of the world, they lead to counter results. One image, not only of company, but entire country and nation are subjected to problems. It is necessary to have soft power, not just tunnel, road, or power line, but we need to create grounds for deep discussion and decision-making. I also go back to this think tank concept. I'll support really in Russia demand for policy analysis where there's paying capacity on part of business and state, the big market. Those don't exist. China is not exception, and Power of Siberia is not exception. Yes, we finance Tsaser and similar stories. Our government, in this sense, is moving, and Kazakh government is moving in some way because there is some money released somehow in Ministry of Economic Development that Stanislav represents as example of openness for the scientists, because Stanislav is interested what provocateurs think. and he speaks with the scientists. Karen also is head of central bank and was always in dialogue. Can we impute this mentality to companies such as Gazprom? Do they need this? Maybe not now. The next question. Good afternoon, Ivan Starikov. Since the postulate of today's discussion is win-win from victory to victory, Atarbayev said that the size of the room is not enough. If colleagues answer affirmative, colleagues from Chinese Republic, from Japan, from Kazakhstan, will be given the 5th floor plenary session hall, and we'll have more TV cameras. But at first, Sasha, I looked at some hallmarks. I looked at Chinese Dream 2049, accepted in October of last year. The first stage, 13th five-year period. I'm ready to dispute with you that at least it will be met. There was limit for the birth of the second child. As you know, this limitation is lifted and this indicator will be met. Second, GDP per capita, about $16,000, the middle society. In the 21st year, it will be met. And third, 60% of Chinese population will live in the cities. It's absolutely different society. It's urbanistic society, a different level of education, culture, and consumption. And then 49th year, what do I mean? Today we talk about connection. In you and Kairat, is there opportunity for connection with Russia in potential of 9,600 kilometers? And we talk about European, it's about 12,000 kilometers of Silkway. What do I mean today? Listen, I don't dispute with Great Chinese Wall in terms of the size, if you look from the space, but the most successful infrastructural projects, not only in Russia, in the world history, is Transsib. It was started in 1891. Even internal combustion engines didn't exist. They built in 25 years. On the 1st of October, there was throughput. Sasha, don't interrupt me, because it depends what kind of room you will have next year. Let's have the question today. I believe that global logistics between West and East cannot rely exclusively on maritime routes, because it's Suez Channel, it's time, also territory of Islamic world with political and military risks, and maritime transportation doesn't create activity. There is seaport, and then there is a sea. You will not build cities and plants in the sea. So it seems today it's quite feasible today to consider opportunity to build second Transsib from Pacific Ocean, from Vladivostok to Rotterdam, and make certain connections with Chinese Silkway. Very briefly, this year. Where's your question? Stanislav Sergeyevich knows 40 million tons of grain should be pushed, otherwise we'll crash the grain market. You can help to transport grain from Novosibirsk province, Omsky province, Orenburg province, Kazakhstan. Today, carry to Vanyan, Nakhodka seaports, and then steamboats take to China, it's not feasible. Make links and move from Russian Transsib to the Silkway. Why new Transsib is needed? Because the bridges, they bring 120 cubic meters of grain transporters. You need to enhance quality of the bridges. Maybe you need to build new bridges. It will cost 19 trillion rubles, $250 billion, according to the current exchange rate. All the calculations are ready. My question, sorry for lagging. We're ready in this case. And they are members of the Chinese Republic and members of Japan. And Trump will not destroy Trans-Ocean Partnership, Pacific Partnership, because 40% of global GDP and 30% of global free trade to build new corridor in Russia to make connection to Chinese Silkway and strong carcass for the Russian space. China, Oceania is Chinese side ready to negotiate the links with new Russian route.
критиковала, что такого
I think we were criticized by one of the girls here that such kind of projects should not be under public discussion. But I think we should arrange a public discussion involving the best experts who would reflect on that.
Questions for Stanislav. One question is, could you elaborate more on how you plan to link ASEAN, SCO, and EAEU? The second question is, could you elaborate more on how you want to link up EAEU and One Belt, One Road?
это корректно.
I think it would be more correct to ask Veronika Olegovna from the European Commission on Trade, but I think that question will require probably an hour of lecture. But briefly speaking, Russia's president has advanced the idea of Eurasian partnership. Some people claim that it's Trans-Pacific partnership, but it is not so. We're talking about the global agreement on the entire Eurasian continent. So the first thing I would do here, I would prefer to set up to create a link between these two questions. I think this possible partnership in the future is a harmonized development of the project which started in 2015. That is the linkage of the EU and the Silk Route may develop into such a big partnership. As for the real plan of action for this partnership, it's true that last year the Russia-ASEAN Forum took place in Sochi, and where there were members, heads of the Eurasian Economic Commission, and precisely there was a very live interest there actually displayed in the economic agreement between Eurasian Union and ASEAN. But I think the beginning lies in the trade economic agreement with China. And then other members could probably join, other players could join this agreement with China. Negotiations on such agreement are underway with the Eurasian Commission.
Thank you very much. My name is Jasmine Wang from Worldview Global Consulting, and our job is advise my clients to invest overseas, actually here in Russia too. And my question is that a lot of my clients, almost all of them, are the small and medium-sized enterprise, and quite a few of them interested in purchase large farms here, to grow the crop. And my question is, I'm looking for advice for them to actually maximize the opportunities and to minimize the risk. Thank you.
And that question goes to probably Stanislav. Will you take it?
Thank you.
Да, но я уже говорил, что
As I mentioned already in January, November 2016, the growth of agricultural products export was stood at 25%. Last year, it grew also 25%. So that's a kind of effect of this base. So, and it's true that from Chinese investors, Japanese investors, and investors on the whole in the Asia-Pacific region, we do see quite a big interest in investment in Russia's agriculture and Russia's farming that has been developing quite dynamically in recent years, by the way. Talking about the Far East, the Agency for the Development of the Far East is dealing closely with that. So I can ask them to meet with you. They will tell you about the terms and conditions, the benefits, and what kind of things in investments in agriculture would be most interesting for you. Also, I would like to tell you that Russia is a great country, is a very big country. Conditions vary. There are different regions, different people live in this region. So I would urge you to work more actively with the Russian regions. They have a huge potential, economic growth potential. But there is one point in the Far East, the Agency for the Development of the Far East. They will tell you exactly about the conditions of work in the Far East. Thank you. Yuri Kornosov, higher school of economics student will continue the tradition of provocative questions. The Silk Route and other Chinese projects that have been mentioned today in Africa and Latin America are about expansion. Can we view this as the evidence that Chinese economy has not reoriented itself so far to internal consumption? Question to Justin.
Investment and expansion.
Well, I think it's a misperception about China. China's trade increased a lot, but not export. China's import also increased a lot. And basically, the trade in China was roughly balanced, except for a few years in 2006, 2007, 2008. In those few years, as the trade balance in China was huge, but that was not mainly because of the high shipping in China. That was the overconsumption mainly in the U.S., resulting a huge trade deficit in the U.S. side and a trade surplus in China side. Except for those few years, actually, the trade balance in China was only about 2%, less than 3%. And for a country at this stage of development to have about 2% trade surplus was a normal phenomenon in almost all the rapid growing developing countries. That's one thing. And then secondly, as I mentioned, China hoped to, opening up to have access to the global markets and global resources. But at the same time, China will also open its markets to the world. So it's not only expansion to outside, but it's also opening up of the domestic for the global, good to be imported into China. And in terms of rebalancing, there's a lot of talk that China need to, change from the investment-led growth to consumption-led growth. And as an economist, I think it's a wrong prescription. Certainly, consumption, it is valuable. But if we want to increase consumption, we need to increase household income. And the way to increase household income is to increase labor productivity. And the mechanism to increase labor productivities is to have technological innovation and also to have industrial upgradings in order to raise labor productivity, but at the same time also need to reduce transaction cost. And the way to reduce transaction cost is to improve infrastructure. And no matter technological innovation, industrial upgrading, or infrastructure improvement, all require investment. So unless we have investment, otherwise we cannot promote consumption. And so the precaution that China should change from investment-led growth to consumption growth is a precaution for China to have some trouble in the future. Certainly, we need to improve the quality of investment. That's true. But to give up investment and come to consumption-led growth, that will be, dangerous for any country, because we see most countries now, they have the crisis, they have trouble, was because they overconsumed.
Thank you so much. Так, у нас осталось реально мало времени. Давайте.
We do not have much time, so let's just take 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. 4 questions. 4 questions. That's it. Dear colleagues, first of all, Professor Sidorovich, Moscow State University. First of all, let me say that it's a very interesting discussion that we are having today. I do not often participate in such debates. When people listen to other people's arguments, and thanks to our moderator, we have an opportunity to look from different angles at certain issues. So what I would like to say, in your presentation, there was a principal message regarding a global project. So the approach towards this project, such international projects, I think that's probably methodologically it's the main starting point, because this project is different from regular traditional regional projects, and including separate country projects. But this is an international agreement. So when we are talking about countries that are supposed to help, and it seems like every country, every nation is trying to defend its own interests, but what we have, we should have in mind that the countries should act jointly. So the question here is that since it's a global project, we need to develop certain mechanisms of interaction between different countries and different partners. From this viewpoint, I think one of the main points that we've heard today, and Mr. Kalimbetov was also referring to that, and he was emphasizing that several times, and I quite agree with him. He was referring to the fact that in the center of this project, of course, there's China and the Eurasian Economic Union. They should be the key players here. Because, you know, I'm not talking about the project from the Atlantic to Vladivostok, but they can be the main pillars of this project, creating the special form of relationship and this conjugation, connectivity in the broad sense of the world. So that's the key issue here is more serious from the viewpoint of discussion, and how much it will cost. That's the question that we should ask. That so. My question: are we talking about direct costs? Direct costs are nothing compared to all costs. It's sometimes the proportion can be 1 to 10. So how much it will cost generally, this infrastructural project, if we are going to view this as a project that works for the longer prospect? So let's take it as a whole and make our computations what it will cost within the next 10 or 20 years. Okay, we understand the question. Thank you. Yes, please. Very briefly, please. Vladimir Tsvetkov, I'm an activist. Well, since the breakup of the Soviet Union, no doubt in the Eurasian and in the global aspect, we've been in a so-called economic decline. But there are three factors for this collapse, this economic downward trend: demographic minimalism, a huge territory with huge resources that we cannot develop entirely, and number three, the minimum productive resources. So we have to somehow overcome this paradoxical situation. Unless we do this, we won't be able to participate in the globalized Eurasian or global economy. So I would like to ask Voskresensky to answer this question. Okay, very briefly, let me say at this point that that was the subject of the panel discussion that was held here 9:30 with Minister of Finance, Minister of Economic Development, the first Deputy Minister, the Central Bank. You were quite right about certain limitations of growth, and that's precisely what they were discussing during 2.5 hours right now in the biggest room here. So that's why your agenda is very actively discussed here. One more question. Two more questions. That's it. The next question is Anna Tsvetkova, Central Bank of Russia. In China, as you've mentioned already, there are excess capacities, and the reform is underway to reduce the excess capacities. So you were mentioning this excess capacities in coal industry and also in steel industry as well. If you start building major infrastructure projects, how is it going to affect the iron and steel industry, and whether it, instead of excess capacities in steel industry, you would probably face shortage, a deficit in this industry. Do you think it might be the same situation in the coal industry? Okay, and the last question here, please. Please. I apologize, but, compared to last year, there's so much activity, Kazakhstan University, Akhmetov. We've heard concerns about expansion, large-scale infrastructural expansion. I think that China, that is moving towards us here as acting in this win-win-win situation, China could provide not only money and infrastructure, but we're talking about the philosophical spirit, Confucius' spirit, and the state management. That's why I have a question to the Chinese party. The Confucius Institution, why they teach only language, but not the philosophy, Confucius' philosophy itself? And the second question to Kyrgyzstan, do we need these Confucius teachings? Do we need this, not only just money and steel? Dear colleagues, unfortunately, all questions, please ask personally. We won't be able to ask them. Justin.
Number one, how much does Belt and Road Initiative cost? Number two, the steel, what will happen to the pricing and market? And number three was the soft power, the fifth point of Belt and Road Initiative, the Confucius Institute and stuff.
Well, how much the One Belt One Road will cost? That depends on how many projects that we are undertaking at any time. And certainly it will be a process for project by project basis. And also the funding will not only come from China alone. China may provide some seed money. Mainly the fund will come from national governments in each country, but also from the global financial institutions, as well as the private sectors. That's one thing. The exact number will depend on the project. And secondly, regarding...
May I intervene as to the cost? Okay.
Yeah, sure. But later, let Justin finish the answer.
And secondly, regarding, currently, yes, China has some excess capacity in steel, in coal, and that is because of the business cycles. And as far as I know, in the steel sectors, in 2014, the capacity utilization rate in China was 65%, in the US 66%, and in Korea less than 65%. Because of the world economy has not, get out of the 2008 financial crisis recession, and so excess capacity is a phenomenon in many, many countries. But if we can, use this opportunity to push the infrastructure project, then it will be the best time. In 2014, the IMF published its World Economic Outlook and advocate. When you have economic recession, it's the best time to construct the infrastructure because the cost will be lowest. And if we come back to a normal growth in the futures, then excess capacity will disappear. Then we need to further expand the capacity in steel, in cement, in order to support the construction. And the third one regarding the soft powers. I think we come to an understanding. We are in a multicultural world, and no one culture can dominate the other culture. So we can learn from other culture, but we cannot say this is the best one. And so in this way, I think the important thing is to be open-minded, to appreciate the culture, the value of other countries in order to be able to work together as a team in the future.
Okay. Tanaka-san.
We are discussing infrastructure building. So from that viewpoint, as to cost, we should focus on the running cost. In China, 20 high-rapid railway networks were completed. Among 20, 16 are making losses. So it's a cost. So from such kind of background, leaders in Chunnan are not so optimistic the future course of Chinese economy. Last year, Renmin Lipao, China Daily, covered the interview with authoritative sources in Chunnan. In that interview, authoritative sources said like this: if we lack structural reform in China, L-letter-shaped economy will be realized, although we don't want that. This is the reality, real analysis and real perception as to the current Chinese economic situation. So cost should be discussed from running cost.
Кто-то хочет ответить, да, на вопрос про коэффициент?
Anyone wants to answer the question about Confucius? I think it's quite an important question that we've been discussing for a long time, but in fact, we don't know much about what has going on in Chinese economy in Asia.
Программы есть.
There are more efforts, there are some funding, there are programs, but they're not enough, because China, you have to understand, because it's #2 economy of the world, it's the future of our part of the world, and we need to seriously deal with this. As we derive from Justin's answer, China is always clearly positions itself that any strategy in relation to any country, first of all, economical and business-oriented, so some values are not imposed, and China in this sense positions itself, unlike some Western countries, that they don't impose any ideology, including its ideology. In any case, it's #2 economy of the world. It will use instruments of soft power. Today, Chinese universities are rated internationally. Tsinghua University is one of the leading universities of the world. New companies such as Alibaba and Huawei is the examples of the high technological development. It's not the China that we used to remember in 50s and 60s. It's 21st century China. Will this be model attractive? It seems that we need to send our students to study and understand what's been happening, how to negotiate, and what are the future programs, and try to derive benefit from this. As to hidden question about how to make these values part of our ideology is a separate big discussion, because ideology is a very delicate issue, and here we need to involve different experts. What I wanted to say, the girl that asked a question about power of Siberia and about think tank, I think it's the only question unanswered, but there's the project Asian Vector, AsianVector.ru, and there are several analytical reports, including a report made for the Presidential Commission on Energy, dedicated to analysis of trends of development of Asia, Pacific area, why power of Siberia, their answers. I remember that in the last letter I received from AsianVector, it stated that it stops because of the financing challenging. I appreciate your sarcasm, Alexander, but the project exists temporarily. The analytics made by mass media, the most expensive part, will be renewed, and since experts used to have free cheese in the mousetrap. Colleagues, we understand that Silk Way is not mousetrap. At least people who are members of this panel don't consider it as the mousetrap. They believe that cheese can be received free without jamming your tail. And if you look through the centuries and use Chinese long-term approach, the games and dances around this mousetrap can be beneficial to our members of the process. Thank you very much. So now, personal communication time.